Thanks so much for listening to the Wild Health Podcast. If you're a Wild Health patient, you might not know, but you have access to our referral program. This gets your friends and family 25% off Wild Health services. Just head to Clarity, and in the top right corner, you'll see Refer a Friend. Click there, and you'll be brought to a page with your referral code. Happy sharing. Hey, Carl. How's it going, buddy?
Good, man. What's happening?
I don't know if you've heard in the news about this weight loss drug.
No, I have no idea what you're talking about. Please tell me. Yeah, no, I've heard a lot about it. Yeah, I get a lot of questions for sure.
You too? It seems like I can't take two steps into a Zoom call without somebody asking me about Ozempic.
Yeah, I can't go down to the soccer field, to my kid's soccer field, without somebody being like, "Hey, you're a doctor, right?" And I'm like, yes.
All right. Well, by popular demand, and also maybe as with a little bit of self-interest that we could refer people to a podcast without going through the entire explanation every time. I thought it'd be great for us to chat about semaglutide and this whole class of GLP-1 receptor agonists. So I'll lead off and give us a little bit of a history here. And even before we do, why is this in the popular media? A lot of folks are touting Ozempic, which is the brand name of semaglutide. Semaglutide's been around for years, but really been used for the last 2 to 5 years. Gained popularity as a treatment for type 2 diabetes, and we'll talk about sort of glycemic control with semaglutide, but was noted to have significant weight loss that came with use of the drug. That led to, an uptick in folks using it really super off-label, just to go ahead and lose some weight, and super popular on TikTok and in celebrity circles and news coverage around diabetics being unable to get access to this medication because of supply chain issues and drug shortages because of the popularity of this medication. So that's sort of the background for why we're getting so many questions and why we feel like it's pertinent to chat about this. So with that aside, semaglutide's a medication that belongs to the class of drugs known as glucagon-like peptide-1 receptor agonists, or GLP agonists, or GLP-1 agonists, used for the treatment of type 2 diabetes and also used for the treatment of obesity. So development of semaglutide was back in the early 2000s when Novo Nordisk, which is a Danish pharmaceutical company, began exploring potential of GLP-1 agonists for the treatment of diabetes. GLP-1 is a naturally occurring hormone that plays a role in glucose regulation and in appetite control. And in 2004, they started some clinical trials to look at efficacy and safety and showed that this effectively reduced blood sugar levels and promoted weight loss and was pretty safe. So based on those results, further studies followed, and then ultimately they developed a once-weekly injectable form of semaglutide, and it's a subcutaneous injection, which offered convenience and patient adherence as opposed to having to take a shot every day. So what was the big sort of turning point or shift in the tides was probably 2017, the SUSTAIN trial. So like all cool trials, it's got a great acronym, right?
Yeah.
So semaglutide, unabated sustainability in treatment of type 2 diabetes. And like all other great trials that are acronyms, that doesn't actually spell sustain, but they take different letters from different words to make it work. So more than 3,000 patients, and showed that once weekly semaglutide was superior to other anti-diabetic medications in lowering hemoglobin A1C and promoting weight loss. Got regulatory approval for type 2 diabetes treatment in the UK, the United States, some other countries in 2017 and 2018, and was marketed under the brand name Ozempic. So the company, given the fact that it was so successful, they then conducted additional trials to explore whether or not it was successful in managing obesity in folks who were non-diabetic. And they did the STEP trial, which this one actually works, semaglutide treatment effect in people with obesity program. And STEPO evaluated the efficacy and safety of semaglutide for weight loss in individuals with obesity. And this really looked at people who were morbidly obese or obese with an obesity-related complication. So things like hypertension, for example, along with their obesity. And this demonstrated, so published in 2020, demonstrated that once weekly injection led to significant weight loss and was well tolerated. based on the results from the STEP trials, semaglutide received regulatory approval in the U.S. for treatment of obesity under the brand name Wegovy. So when we're talking about Ozempic, Wegovy, semaglutide, we're really just talking about semaglutide. It's in a slightly higher dose in Wegovy than it is in Ozempic, but it's the same medication. And there's ongoing research looking at whether or not it has potential benefit in other areas like cardiovascular disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, et cetera. So that's the big background. And with all that said, tirzepatide, which is a related medication, so it's a GLP-1 agonist, but also has some other GLP-1 hormone effects, looks like it's significantly more effective than semaglutide. Right. So it does seem like we're kind of like on the cusp of this whole class of medications taking off. And I can put a link in the show notes. A great trial in the New England Journal of Medicine looking at tirzepatide versus semaglutide and showing, not only was it not inferior, it was superior in every dose that they checked.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of that, like the trajectory of like the timeline you just laid out, that seems pretty fast for a drug to market and to be used at the, as much as it is. Like that's we're talking 2017 to 2023, and now it's like we've got offshoots of that same drug that are more effective and studies of that. Like that's a fast turnaround, man.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say it. I look at it and I think, in some ways, it's also a slow turnaround, right?
Okay.
Think about how long it took for the development of an effective antiviral for COVID, and look at the obesity pandemic and how long the obesity and diabetes pandemic's been around.
Yeah.
I mean, it maybe not as fast as it needed to be, but all the Monday morning quarterbacking aside, talk to us a bit about like what are the health benefits? So why does this help people in both type 2 diabetes and obesity?
Yeah, so when I think about these medications, I think that kind of the basic of how they work is the kind of basic overview is they stimulate insulin release, they slow gastric emptying, and they reduce appetite. And they reduce appetite, actually, that effect is actually in your brain, and receptors in your brain. And then there's receptors in your stomach that changes how fast food gets kind of pushed through there, which have effects on your blood sugar, but also satiety or feeling full as well. And then the stimulating of releasing of insulin, which helps put blood glucose into your cell. So the health benefits kind of stem from that. So number one would be the big one, obviously, when you're talking about diabetes, is blood sugar control. So semaglutide helps lower blood sugar levels by stimulating the insulin secretion and reducing production of glucagon, which is a hormone that raises blood sugar. So this kind of then improves glycemic control and kind of flattens out your spikes and prolong elevated blood sugars. And then when we see that translated into what we look at as hemoglobin A1C, which is kind of a marker of your blood sugar over the last 3-6 months time frame. So that's one health benefit, and that we know that there's tons of benefits from control. Obviously, you have all the downstream effects from diabetes, so the opposite's true there. But then there's weight loss. So semaglutide is found to promote weight loss, particularly in individuals who are already obese. And this works through reducing appetite and then also the changes in the gastric emptying by making people feel full and by slowing down that how fast you're pushing food through. And then there's the cardiovascular health. So we think that there's some evidence mounting that there's suggesting that semaglutide has a cardiovascular benefit. We think this is all probably from changing the risk around diabetes and then in the association with weight loss there. And then there's
hold on one second, Carl.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me jump in there. This is one of the things that makes, like, the first time I heard about GLP-1 agonists was in this context, because you can't really underestimate this effect. The other diabetes medications that are out there, things like metformin, things like insulin, they've shown people have tried and tried and tried to show macrovascular changes, so the large blood vessel changes, and that there's a benefit in macrovascular risk towards controlling diabetes with metformin or with insulin. In the long run, we're really able to see that you control microvascular risk with insulin and metformin. So the risk of kidney failure, the risk of blindness, retinal changes. We don't really see macrovascular benefit with insulin and metformin. And this class of medications is so compelling, like even outside of the obesity effects and the hemoglobin A1C, you can often get really good results with hemoglobin A1C with insulin or with metformin use. But if you can reduce major adverse cardiovascular events, things like heart attack, stroke with a medication, that's something, yet another thing that makes this really special in sort of the whole class of hypoglycemic medications.
Yeah, when you start seeing those type of hard outcomes, it's hard to you kind of have to make those leaps in some of these studies where we're just looking at hemoglobin A1C changes, similar to cholesterol studies and things like that. You want the outcome to be like incident, right? So incident of heart attack, stroke, or death, right? And when you start seeing that data, then it becomes like more powerful, right? It's like the real outcome you care about. Do I really care about what my hemoglobin A1C number is? No. Do I care if I die? Yes. And so
exactly. So patient-oriented outcomes always a really wonderful thing to see showing up with convincing evidence behind it.
So the other thing is that it's sort of it's the reduction or the reduced risk with this medication of having hypoglycemia. So there's a lot of medications that people get for diabetes, so including insulin, that can lower your blood sugars dramatically to the point where it's a dangerous level. So too low, hypoglycemia, hypo meaning low, and glycemia, your glucose. So really low glucose that can actually kill people. That's a bad thing. And so this medication doesn't do that. So it's more of a flattening out of your glucoses and not these high spikes. Then there's this other entity we should talk about, the potential benefit, and this is sort of newer research, but around treatment for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or also called NAFLD. So some research suggests that semaglutide may have a positive effect on liver health, and including reducing liver fat accumulation and improving liver enzymes levels that are in individuals with not what's called NAFLD, which happens with people with diabetes, and so that is one other health benefits. But also, whenever you're talking about the benefits, you got to talk about what's the bang for your buck, what's the side effects, right? And so there are side effects. These like any medication, there's always a downside. I think there's a couple of them that are talked about more predominantly, but ones that aren't talked about as much is people, anytime your memory said that there's receptors in your gut, in your intestine, well, anytime you start messing with that, you're going to get some side effects there. And so, side effects can include with that like nausea and vomiting and diarrhea and constipation, abdominal pain, and the, indigestion, but also people can have pretty profound appetite, loss of appetite. They just don't want to eat. And they're not even taking in that many liquids because they feel so full. And so hydrating themselves and things like that. So there is, although I just said this, there's a very low risk for hypoglycemia. There's is a risk for semaglutide, a very low risk of it causing hypoglycemia when it's used by itself. And this may occur in, or when it's used by itself, that's when it's very low risk. When you start combining it with other medications, then the risk starts to go up. There's a class of medication that is used for diabetes. It's called sulfonylureas. Or when you combine it and you're using insulin with patients in semaglutide, then their risk of having a hypoglycemic event goes up a little bit. So for people who are using this, symptoms of hypoglycemia, shakiness, dizziness, sweating, confusion, rapid heart rate, those are all signs of that. Then there's like anytime you're injecting yourself, you can get an infection there and local reaction around that. I think that's pretty minor. I haven't actually heard of anybody complaining of that, but obviously anytime you inject yourself,
little pain when you inject yourself, maybe, or some redness or itching, but nothing that tends to be terribly profound.
So there's like kind of three more things. So one is pancreatitis. So this is not very common, but I think it is a potential like bigger side effect where you have inflammation of your pancreas. So this is associated with some of these receptor agonists, including semaglutide. People get pretty bad abdominal pain with pancreatitis. They get nausea, vomiting. There's downstream side effects from pancreatitis, from a severe pancreatitis that are not great, and once you have a bout of pancreatitis, you kind of can be more prone to get another bout. So that's not, and then people can get like cysts in their pancreas and things like that, and that's not great. So there's discussions about thyroid tumors in animal studies, as semaglutide has been shown to cause increased rates of thyroid tumors, particularly in rodents. So it's kind of important to note that this has not been a finding in humans, and is still kind of being checked out. But there's obviously, that's like when you start seeing that in rodents, that makes you concerned that there's risk there. And then I think maybe you could talk a little bit more about this side effect. There's the discussion that I've been concerned about. The main thing I've been concerned about is around muscle wasting, and people losing weight, and that a lot of that being fat and fat in areas that they don't want the fat. Like, I mean, not all fat is created equal, but also what I'm more concerned about is just some muscle wasting and loss of muscle mass, which is so important for people's metabolic health and longevity.
Yeah. So the one other thing I'd add to that side effect list is gallstones. I think that there has been a slight increased risk of gallstones as well. Now, gallstones not nearly as bad as pancreatitis, and it doesn't appear that pancreatitis is gallstone pancreatitis in folks, that there's an increased risk there. It does tend to look like it's an independent risk for acute pancreatitis. Let's talk about the muscle mass stuff. So, like, ultimately, what's the question that everybody really wants to know the answer to? We're almost 20 minutes in here, and hopefully we've got you listening enough that you stayed tuned for the take-home point, which is, should I be taking semaglutide? And I think in the if we're going to find out if this is a miracle drug or not, there's a few things that we have to take into account. So, number one, is it affordable? Is it something you can actually use? So, difficult to get covered by some insurance. If you're off insurance, you're paying between $900 and $1,300 a month for Ozempic or Wegovy. So, like, that's not an inexpensive medication, right? We're not talking like monoclonal antibody infusion cost or like chemotherapy cost, but it's like really prohibitive for a ton of people. That is a lot of money. You're talking about spending upwards of $10,000 a year on this. And then, how effective is it and how much of a problem do you have? So, like, if you're really obese and you've been trying to improve your body composition and lose fat and not having success, or if you've got difficult to control diabetes, there's a lot of promise here. This may be a great medication for you. Side effects we talked about, certainly, like if somebody had a history of pancreatitis, had a few bouts of acute pancreatitis in the past, that would make me use pretty significant caution about recommending that they start on semaglutide. And then there's this lean muscle mass thing. So, just to put this in context, if, when people talk about losing weight, what they want to do is lose fat, right? Nobody's really interested in losing all their muscle, losing 30 pounds of muscle and keeping all of their fat on board, right? People want to lose fat. And in, some of the folks, this is part of the problem with studies that are done on weight loss medications. Like, this is not the first weight loss medication to be studied, right? I mean, we've looked at, all the way to fen-phen to other stimulants.
That's the first thing.
There's lots of them. None of them really worked out terribly well, but all of them showed a reduction in weight. But we're not really interested in a reduction in weight. We're interested in a reduction in fat. So if you lose lean muscle mass, like if you lose 5 pounds of lean muscle and 5 pounds of fat while you're taking semaglutide, you may be 10 pounds light. You will be 10 pounds lighter, but unless you were 50% fat, you've lost proportionally more muscle. So you weigh less, but you're actually more fat. So this is a really significant thing to keep in mind, because we know that, as you mentioned, maintenance of lean muscle mass as we age, preventing what's called sarcopenia or muscle loss, is critical. It's critical for glycemic control. It's critical for our balance and strength and ability to prevent falls, and just for keeping us vital and healthy as we age. So,
not to mention, it's critical for your bone health and risk of fractures.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say, not to mention, it's critical for like looking good when you go swimming, right? I mean, like you don't want to lose all your lean muscle mass.
Yeah, it's because of your beach bod.
Sun's out, guns out. But, one of the things that has me concerned here is, how does this medication work? It works a lot like gastric bypass, right? I mean, you basically don't take in as many calories. And we know that gastric bypass works, but that people also lose muscle mass. And it is, and disproportionately typically to fat loss. And if you're going to really, you mentioned it works centrally on your appetite. It also works through, slowed gastric emptying and that feeling of fullness. If you're 180 pounds and you're targeting 150 to 180 grams of protein a day, like, that's a lot of hard work. Even if you are relatively hungry, it's hard to get all that protein in. If you all of a sudden just like don't even want to eat, that's, I think, really setting people up for muscle wasting and for some really body composition effects. So, I know that people talk about doing DEXA before, body composition measurement beforehand, before considering initiating semaglutide, and then or tirzepatide, like whatever you're going to go for, and then following that to make sure that you're not losing too much lean muscle as you're going. So I think for me, I have a couple of patients on semaglutide who are doing body composition assessment. I don't know that I'm so bullish on it that I'd say like you need to be doing this. I think if you're morbidly obese and this is your option as opposed to gastric bypass, the benefits probably outweigh the harms, even if you do lose some muscle mass. But I would definitely take caution in the sort of mostly healthy, diabetic, or the folks who are using this really, really off-label in, I just want to lose 20 pounds, and you're not already obese and you don't have diabetes. I think you have to be really cautious about making sure that you maintain your protein intake, you maintain your resistance training, and you're doing everything you can to combat that, proportional muscle loss.
And I think there's something you said there that I think maybe, glazed over was, it's like resistance training. Like I've talked to several providers that they won't even have this conversation with their patients, or they'll have the conversation, I should say. They just are, if they're not, significantly strength training, then they're like, you have to maximize, you're maximizing those other aspects out. You're doing all the lifestyle work and still like not, you still have a significant amount of weight to lose. Your diabetes is still not well controlled, but you're doing all the right things. The hard time I'm talking with providers, and for me, is when people aren't doing all the right things, like the strength training, assuming they can do that, they're not limited by some injury. But if they're not doing those things, it's really hard for me to say like, oh yeah, let's put you on this medication that carries this significant risk, and we're not doing the things to negate that risk as best we can. That makes that conversation hard.
Totally agree. I think the yes and for that for me would be somebody who's just kicking off significant lifestyle changes, who's really significantly obese, right?
Yeah.
You're dealing with somebody with a, an extra 120 pounds of fat to lose. And, I think there is, and I have no evidence for this, this is just opinion, but I think there's a potential role for even a limited course of GLP-1 agonist while people are doing the rest of the work, because you'll see results faster, and that can be a real positive reinforcement and a positive feedback loop for people to see the weight coming off. So I might consider it, but that's somebody who's already like so clearly a candidate for the medication. Not in somebody who's just looking for a quick, easy way to lose some weight. I think that's that concerns me.
And I think one thing to talk about when you are taking people off, if they kind of abruptly stopped, you can have glucose spikes and kind of significant worsening of your diabetes. It's not always like oh, hey, you did a good job, we'll take you off the next day kind of thing, or you're just like, I'm going on vacation, I'm going off this or whatever.
Probably tapering. And I mean, again, along the thyroid tumor conversation, like, we don't know what it looks like to be on semaglutide for 10 years, right? We don't know if that does lead to an increased risk in thyroid cancer. We don't know if there are other side effects that are longer term that we haven't seen yet. We don't know if there's a tolerance that builds up that makes it very challenging to come off of the medication at some point. So that's just all grain of salt stuff to take with a relatively new class of medications that haven't been in widespread popular use for a long time. So definitely something to, at least consider. And then one other thing I just wanted to be sure to mention, because this has come up in both popular media and some questions from patients around this as well, has been, and I haven't seen really convincing prospective data on this, but it does seem like a very common thread for people to lose their taste for alcohol and even for drug cravings with semaglutide use. And I don't really know where that mechanism is. It doesn't seem like it. I mean, I guess you could say, if you're really suppressing your appetite, you don't feel like drinking, but I don't think that's what it is. I mean, I think there's another sort of central dopamine pathway that's somehow being affected by semaglutide use, where it does seem like that's just a added benefit for some patients, where they just kind of lose interest in alcohol and recreational drug use. So it would be really fascinating to see kind of, future studies investigating that, and whether, anytime we can get an effective medication or treatment of any kind, frankly, that can help to stem some of the, really widespread abuse of alcohol and recreational drugs. That's always so promising and definitely piques my interest.
Yeah. That's that makes me super intrigued. I guess I don't know that evidence or very well, but I guess it seems like I need to dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, sweet. I mean, I think it's at this, and by the time we publish this, it'll probably be outdated. But I do think there's a couple of studies from this year. GLP-1 semaglutide reduces alcohol drinking and modulates central GABA neurotransmission. So it does. There's some animal studies on that was in humans, and then there's some animal studies in rats. Actually, that one may also be in rats. Actually, hold on, let me see. Because
rats avoiding tequila.
Yeah. Just leaves more tequila for their rat owners. Yeah, no, it looks like it's all rodent data at this point. Oh. But I'll say that despite the lack of human data available, this is something that I've heard multiple times from patients and I've read in the popular media. So I think that there's a signal there, but jury's out on how strong of a suppressant it is and how many, what percentage of patients may expect to feel that added benefit of losing their desire to drink or use recreational drugs.
That's super fascinating.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's quickly turning into like the Windex of medications, right? It
I use
does,
it for my counters. I use it for my
yeah,
bathroom. My
NAFLD,
windows.
diabetes, obesity, alcohol abuse, whatever you want. Semaglutide, it's for you. Anything you feel, any stones you feel like we left unturned on this one, Carl, or
this is
those
great,
are the big
man.
topics?
This is great. I think I think we're going to be in the future probably prescribing more of these type of medications. What that looks like. I'm interested in what this looks like in 5 years, because 5 years ago, this medication started, and I remember kind of vaguely hearing about it, and now it's kind of everywhere. What this looks like in another 5 years is, I don't know, kind of exciting.
All right. Well, stay tuned. I'll put a calendar reminder for 5 years from today. We can sit down and talk about GLP-2 antagonists. I don't think that works that way.
Part
but,
deux. Yeah.
Part deux. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, buddy.
All right. Yeah, no problem. Thanks, man.
Hey, everyone. Whether you're a medical practitioner or someone who's just generally interested in precision medicine, we're offering our podcast listeners an exclusive 20% off Wild Health's Precision Medicine Training Program. This 6-month immersive course includes over 50 hours of online curriculum, as well as live webinars and practical experiences. If you're already a health coach or medical professional, this program teaches you how to provide your patients with more personalized, genetics-based care. Better yet, Wild Health's Precision Medicine Training Program is accredited by the National Board of Health and Wellness Coaching and fully prepares you to sit for the NBHWC exam. To learn more about the program and apply today, head to wildhealth.com/education and be sure to mention the podcast for 20% off. Space is limited. Offer applies to June applicants only.